The pencil shavings fell in perfect spirals onto the requisition form, each curl catching the fluorescent light of the supply office like tiny copper wings. Lieutenant Colonel Vera Mockingbird Reeves had been relegated to this basement office for 3 months now, her hands that once gripped F-16 throttles now reduced to processing equipment requests. The mechanical pencil sharpener's grinding filled the silence, until it didn't. Two Marines in dress blues stood in her doorway, their shadows cutting across the linoleum floor like blade edges. The taller one, a captain with eyes that had seen too much desert sun, extended a manila folder marked with red classification stamps that seemed to pulse in the sterile light. "Ma'am, you need to come with us. Now." The pencil dropped from her fingers, rolling across the desk until it stopped against her nameplate, the one they'd given her when they'd grounded her after Kandahar. She hadn't flown in 387 days, but her body still remembered the weight of 9GS, the way horizon lines became suggestions rather than facts. The folder felt heavier than it should have when she took it, as if it contained not just papers but the weight of whatever had made these Marines drive 3 hours from Quantico to find her in this forgotten corner of Fort Belvoir. Inside, a single photograph, an aircraft she'd never seen before, something that looked like it had been born from fevered dreams of aerospace engineers who'd stopped caring about budgets or physics. Below it, coordinates that made her pulse quicken, airspace over the Pacific that didn't officially exist. "There's a car waiting," the captain said, and she noticed his hands were shaking slightly, the kind of tremor that came not from fear but from adrenaline held too long in check. "Your flight experience from the Kandahar incident. Command believes you're the only one who can fly this." The Kandahar incident. They never called it what it was. The day she'd saved 37 souls by breaking every regulation in the book, landing a damaged Hercules in a sandstorm with half her instruments dead and her co-pilot unconscious. The day that had ended her career and started her exile. Now they needed her. The irony tasted metallic, like blood from biting your tongue too long. She stood, her body moving with muscle memory toward whatever crisis had finally made them remember that Mockingbird wasn't just a call sign, it was earned. The Marines flanked her as they walked through corridors she'd once strode through with purpose, past offices where colleagues avoided eye contact, their expressions mixing surprise with something else. Vindication, perhaps, or pity. Outside, a black SUV idled with engine running, exhaust visible in the November chill. As she slid into the backseat, she caught her reflection in the window, 43 years old, silver threading through regulation-short brown hair, eyes that had learned to hide their sharpness behind bureaucratic fatigue. But underneath, something was awakening. The captain climbed in beside her, pulling out a tablet that displayed technical specifications that made her forget to breathe. "The aircraft is designated Project Blackbird. It's been in development for 12 years, cost $8 billion, and as of 6 hours ago, it's the only thing standing between us and an international incident that could trigger Article 5. She studied the specifications, her mind already calculating thrust-to-weight ratios, angle of attack limitations, the way such a machine would handle in the thin air above 60,000 feet. "Who's flying it now?" The captain's jaw tightened. "That's the problem, ma'am. The test pilot, Colonel Morrison, suffered a stroke during the final systems check yesterday. You're not the backup plan. There is no backup plan, you're it." The SUV accelerated onto the highway, heading toward Andrews Air Force Base, where she could see aircraft lights blinking against the darkening sky like coded messages. She opened the folder again, found the mission parameters, and felt her stomach drop. This wasn't just about flying an experimental aircraft. This was about intercepting something, or someone, that had every intelligence agency in the Western world running scenarios that all ended the same way, catastrophically. "When do I launch?" she asked, her voice steady despite the earthquake happening in her chest. "Wheels up in 4 hours, the captain replied. "We'll brief you en route to Nevada, Area 51 adjacent, where they kept the toys that didn't officially exist, where they sent pilots who were either the best of the best or completely expendable. After Kandahar, she knew which category she fell into." But as the lights of Washington fell behind them and the SUV pushed through the darkness toward whatever waited in the desert, Vera Reeves felt something she hadn't experienced in 387 days. The peculiar calm that came before stepping into an aircraft that wanted to kill you. Her fingers found the edge of the photograph again, tracing the aircraft's impossible lines. Blackbird, a name that echoed her own call sign, as if fate had a sense of humor about the whole thing. She'd been Mockingbird because she could mimic any aircraft's flight characteristics after flying it once, her brain cataloging performance envelopes like other people remembered song lyrics. Now they wanted her to fly something that had no comparison, no reference point, no margin for error. The captain's phone buzzed. He answered in clipped syllables, his face growing paler with each word. When he hung up, he turned to her with eyes that had aged years in seconds. "There's been a development. The timeline just accelerated. We need you airborne in 2 hours. 2 hours to learn an aircraft that had taken 12 years to build. 2 hours to prepare for a mission that could prevent or cause World War III. 2 hours to prove that grounding her had been their mistake, not hers." She closed the folder, closed her eyes, and let her mind begin building the cockpit in her imagination. Every switch, every gauge, every warning light that would scream at her when she pushed the aircraft beyond its limits. Because she would push it beyond its limits. That's why they'd come for her. Mockingbird didn't just fly aircraft. She made them sing songs they didn't know they could sing. And somewhere in the Nevada desert, a $8 billion bird was waiting to learn its tune. The SUV hit turbulence, no, a pothole, and her eyes snapped open. Through the windshield she could see the first stars appearing, each one a navigation point in the vast nothing of space. Where she was going, she'd be able to touch them. Or at least it would feel that way, up where the sky turned black and the earth curved beneath you like a secret God finally decided to share. The Marine captain was watching her, and she realized he was younger than she'd first thought. Young enough to have been in high school when she was flying combat missions over Afghanistan. "Ma'am, permission to speak freely," she nodded, appreciating the formality even as they raced toward chaos. "My father flew with you in the 388th, Captain James Sullivan. He said you were the best pilot he ever saw." Sullivan. She remembered him, steady hands, terrible poker face, had a daughter back home he talked about constantly. "He retired 5 years ago," the captain continued. "Still talks about the day you saved his life over Helmand. Says you threading that canyon with 2 engines out was like watching someone argue with physics and win." "Physics doesn't care about arguments," she replied. "It only respects those who know when to break its rules." The captain smiled slightly. "That's what my father said you'd say." They were approaching Andrews now, the base sprawling before them like a small city dedicated to the proposition that air superiority was not negotiable. But they weren't stopping here. A Gulfstream waited on the tarmac, engines already spinning, ready to race the clock to Nevada. As they transferred from the SUV to the aircraft, she noticed something. The ground crew were all women, every single one. They stood at attention as she passed, and she understood the message someone was sending. This wasn't just about the mission. This was about proving something that should never have needed proving. Inside the Gulfstream, the briefing materials were laid out with military precision. Technical manuals, mission parameters, satellite imagery of regions she wasn't supposed to know existed. And at the center of it all, a flight suit with her name already stitched onto it, along with a patch she'd never seen before. A black bird rising from flames, the word Phoenix beneath it. Not Mockingbird. Phoenix. Someone thought she was going to rise from her ashes today. She changed into the flight suit in the cramped bathroom, noting how it incorporated technologies that hadn't existed when she'd last worn one. The material felt alive against her skin, responsive to temperature and pressure changes. When she emerged, 3 people were waiting. An aerospace engineer who looked like she hadn't slept in days, a CIA analyst with eyes that processed information like a supercomputer, and someone whose uniform bore no insignia at all, which meant they were important enough not to need any. "Colonel Reeves," the engineer began, pulling up holographic displays that turned the Gulfstream's cabin into a 3-dimensional classroom. "What you're about to fly doesn't officially exist." It combines scramjet technology with conventional turbofans, capable of reaching speeds that violate every treaty we've signed since 1967, the CIA analyst interrupted. Which is why, until 6 hours ago, it was never supposed to be activated. The person with no insignia leaned forward. 6 hours ago, we detected an object entering Earth's atmosphere at coordinates that suggested originated from the Chinese space station. Except the Chinese station is currently on the other side of the planet, and whatever this is, it's not falling, it's flying. Controlled descent, changing vectors, behaving in ways that suggest it's not from the Chinese, Vera finished. Or anyone else we know. Silence filled the cabin, heavy as pressure at altitude. The Blackbird can reach it, the engineer said quietly. It's the only thing we have that can reach it, but the flight profile required. She pulled up numbers that made Vera's teeth ache. You'll need to push to Mach 6.8 at 80,000 feet, then execute a zoom climb to 120,000 feet where you'll have approximately 40 seconds to make visual contact, and if necessary, engage. Engage with what? Vera asked. The Blackbird has no weapon systems in the traditional sense, the engineer replied. She brought up another schematic. It has something else. An electromagnetic pulse generator that can be focused directionally, non-lethal to biological systems but devastating to anything electronic within a half-mile radius. So I'm not shooting it down, I'm switching it off. If it can be switched off, the analyst added. We don't know what we're dealing with. Could be a malfunctioning satellite, could be a weapons platform, could be something else entirely, the figure with no insignia finished. The Gulf Stream began its descent into Nevada, the lights of Las Vegas visible in the distance like a neon oasis in the desert dark. But they weren't heading for Vegas. They were heading for a strip of concrete that didn't appear on any civilian maps, where hangars were built into mountainsides, and the night shift consisted of people who'd signed away their right to ever speak about what they'd seen. Vera studied the flight characteristics one more time, her mind absorbing every detail. The Blackbird was beautiful in its impossibility, a fusion of technologies that shouldn't work together but somehow did, as if someone had taken every lesson learned from 70 years of aviation and decided to ignore all the reasons things couldn't be done. There's one more thing, the engineer said hesitantly. The Blackbird's life support system is only rated for 3 hours at maximum altitude. Your mission profile requires 2 hours and 40 minutes to reach intercept. That leaves you 20 minutes of margin, 20 minutes of oxygen between success and suffocating in the near vacuum of space. She'd had worse odds. What's my abort window? There isn't one, the person with no insignia said simply. Once you launch, you either complete the mission or I don't come back. She said it without emotion, a statement of fact as neutral as announcing the weather. We understand if you want to refuse. I'm not refusing. Stood as the Gulf Stream touched down, feeling the Nevada desert air already seeping into the cabin, dry and electric with possibility. But I want something in return. The three officials exchanged glances. If I complete this mission, my record gets cleared. Full reinstatement, full back pay, and a written apology for the review board's decision after Kandahar. The analysts started to speak, probably to say they didn't have that authority. The person with no insignia raised a hand, silencing him. Done, that easy, which meant this was even more serious than they were letting on. The Gulfstream's door opened, revealing a convoy of vehicles waiting in the darkness, their lights off except for thin strips of blue LED that made them look like they were bleeding light into the desert. Beyond them, something massive lurked in a hangar that could have swallowed a commercial airliner. The Blackbird. She could feel it waiting, patient as a predator. As they drove toward the hangar, she noticed the stars again, clearer here than anywhere else she'd been, the desert air so dry it seemed to pull the cosmos closer to Earth. In less than 3 hours, she'd be among them, riding $8 billion of impossible engineering towards something that might reshape humanity's understanding of its place in the universe. Or she'd be dead. Those were really the only two options. The convoy stopped, and she stepped out onto tarmac that still radiated heat from the day's sun. The hangar doors were opening, sliding apart with surprising silence to reveal the aircraft that would either redeem her or end her. The Blackbird didn't look like it should fly. It looked like someone had taken a knife blade and given it wings, then painted it with materials that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The cockpit was a bubble of transparent material she didn't recognize, offering visibility that would make conventional aircraft designers weep with envy. Ground crew swarmed around it, each moving with the precision of people who knew that one mistake could cascade into catastrophe. "Colonel," someone called, and she turned to find a flight surgeon approaching with a medical kit. "I need to clear you for high-altitude operations." "Make it fast," she said, already feeling time compressing around her like G-forces. As the surgeon ran through his checks, blood pressure, reflexes, cognitive tests that seemed insultingly simple, she kept her eyes on the Blackbird. It had no visible weapons, no traditional hardpoints, just smooth, uninterrupted surfaces that looked more organic than manufactured, like something that had evolved rather than been built. "You're cleared," the surgeon announced, though his expression suggested he had reservations. Everyone had reservations. That's why she was here. She was the only one whose reservations didn't matter anymore. The engineer appeared at her elbow, holding a helmet that looked more like something from a science fiction movie than military hardware. "This interfaces directly with the aircraft systems. You'll be able to control most functions through eye movement and neural feedback." Neural feedback. The helmet reads electrical patterns from your brain. Think about banking left, and the aircraft begins the motion before your hands even move. Flying with thought. After 387 days grounded, she was about to fly with her mind. "Time to mount up," the person with no insignia announced. The entire hangar seemed to hold its breath as she walked toward the boarding ladder. Each step echoed in the vast space, marking seconds they didn't have to waste. She climbed into the cockpit, surprised by how familiar it felt despite its alien technology. The seat adjusted automatically to her body, conforming like it had been waiting for her specifically. The helmet slid on, and suddenly the aircraft systems bloomed in her vision, not on screens but seemingly projected directly onto her retinas. Pre-flight checks scrolled past, the Blackbird running diagnostics on itself, occasionally asking for her input with gentle pulses of light. Everything was green. Everything was ready. She was ready. "Mockingbird, this is Control," a voice said directly into her skull, the helmet's communication system bypassing her ears entirely. "Weather is clear, winds negligible. You are cleared for engine start." Her hands found the controls, or rather, the controls found her hands, adjusting their position to match her reach perfectly. The engines came alive with a sound like the world's largest tuning fork being struck, a harmonic that she felt in her bones. "Engine start confirmed. All systems nominal." Nominal. Such a small word for something so far from normal. The hangar doors were fully open now, revealing a runway that stretched toward mountains outlined by stars. The Blackbird began to move, not rolled by a tug but under its own power, prowling toward the threshold like something eager to hunt. "Mockingbird, be advised, your target has increased velocity. Intercept window has narrowed to 18 minutes. 18 minutes to save the world, or at least to prevent it from changing in ways nobody could predict." She nudged the throttles forward, feeling the aircraft respond instantly, eagerly, as if it had been waiting its entire existence for someone to finally let it run. "Control, Mockingbird. Ready for departure." "Mockingbird, you are cleared for takeoff. Godspeed." Godspeed. An interesting choice of words for a mission that would take her to heights where some said God lived. She pushed the throttles to their first detent, and the Blackbird leaped forward with acceleration that pressed her into the seat like a giant's hand. The runway lights blurred into streams of white. The desert floor fell away, and Vera Mockingbird Reeves rose into the night sky to meet whatever was falling or flying toward Earth. The Blackbird climbed at an angle that would have torn conventional aircraft apart, its engines screaming harmonics that hadn't been heard since the SR-71 retired. But this wasn't an SR-71. This was something else, something that treated the sound barrier like a minor inconvenience to be pushed through without ceremony. Passing through 10,000 feet, she felt the first hint of what this machine could do, a smoothness to its acceleration that suggested massive reserves of power still untapped. Mockingbird, radar has you at Angels 20 and climbing. Target is maintaining course, now at Angels 150 and descending slowly. 150,000 feet. The edge of space, where the atmosphere became a suggestion rather than a reality. Whatever was up there had started higher still. The helmet fed her information in layers: altitude, airspeed, engine temperatures, all overlaid with predictive arcs showing where she'd be in 10 seconds, 30 seconds, a minute. Her mind processed it all without conscious thought, the neural interface learning her patterns, adapting to her style. At 40,000 feet, she pushed into the second throttle detent. The acceleration hit like a sledgehammer made of silk, brutal but smooth, pressing her eyeballs back into their sockets while the G-suit squeezed her legs to keep blood in her brain. The Blackbird's skin temperature was climbing, friction from the increasingly thin air heating the exotic materials of its hull. But it was designed for this, built to turn atmospheric friction into additional propulsion through some mechanism the engineer had tried to explain, but which Vera filed under aerospace magic. Mockingbird, target has changed vector. New intercept calculations incoming. The data flowed into her vision, showing the object above performing maneuvers that shouldn't be possible: 90-degree turns without deceleration, sudden stops that would liquefy any human pilot. Whatever was controlling it either wasn't human or wasn't inside it. 60,000 feet. The sky had darkened to deep purple, stars visible even though the sun was still technically above the horizon somewhere. The curvature of Earth was becoming visible, a gentle arc that reminded her how small everything really was. Initiating scramjet sequence, she announced, reaching for the third throttle detent. This was where the Blackbird stopped pretending to be a normal aircraft and became something else entirely. The transition was violent. The turbofans cut out for a heartbeat, and in that silence she could hear her own pulse thundering in her ears. Then the scramjets ignited, and acceleration became a living thing that tried to claw her soul out through her spine. Mach 3, Mach 4. The numbers climbed faster than her brain could process them. The Blackbird's hull was glowing now. She could see it reflected in the cockpit glass, a dull red like coals in a dying fire. The helmet compensated for the vibration, keeping her vision stable even as her body was being shaken at frequencies that would blur normal human sight. Mach 5, Mach 6, 80,000 feet. The target was visible now on her sensors, a blob of impossible heat against the cold of space. It was moving again, lateral shifts that covered miles in seconds, playing with her, or testing her. Mockingbird, be advised, NSA intercepts suggest the object is transmitting on multiple frequencies. Pattern analysis indicates, the voice cut off, replaced by static that formed almost patterns like language filtered through dreams. The neural interface was picking something up, translating electromagnetic radiation into sensations her brain could almost understand. The object was talking, not to Earth's communication systems but to something else somewhere else. A report home, perhaps, or a call for backup. She pushed through Mach 6.5, the Blackbird straining against its own design limits. Warning lights bloomed in her peripheral vision, but she ignored them. The aircraft could take it. It had to take it. 90,000 feet. The sky was black now, stars burning with steady light instead of twinkling. Below, Earth looked like a living thing, clouds swirling in patterns that resembled the neural pathways the helmet was reading from her brain. The object was closer, resolving into something her eyes couldn't quite accept. It wasn't aerodynamic. It was geometric, all angles and surfaces that shouldn't generate lift but somehow did. It pulsed with light that didn't match any spectrum the Blackbird's sensors recognized. Initiating zoom climb, she announced, pulling back on the stick with precisely calculated force. The Blackbird stood on its tail, trading speed for altitude in a maneuver that would reach the edge of its operational envelope. 100,000 feet. 110,000. Her breathing was becoming labored, the oxygen system struggling to keep up with the demands of her body under this stress. 120,000 feet. The Blackbird hung at the apex of its climb, engines screaming in the near vacuum, barely generating thrust. And there it was, close enough to see details that made her military training scream warnings while her human curiosity whispered in awe. The object wasn't a machine in any conventional sense. It looked more like crystallized mathematics, something that existed because equations demanded it rather than engineering building it. It turned toward her. She couldn't explain how she knew it was turning toward, rather than just turning, but the sensation was unmistakable, like being noticed by something vast and impossibly intelligent. Mockingbird, you have 15 seconds at this altitude before you must descend. Recommend immediate deployment of EMP package. 15 seconds to make a decision that might define humanity's future. The object pulsed again, and through the neural interface she felt something that might have been a greeting, or a warning, or both. Her hand hovered over the EMP trigger. One pulse would shut it down, send it tumbling into the Pacific where recovery teams were already mobilizing. But looking at it, seeing the impossible grace of its movements, the obvious intelligence behind its actions, she hesitated. Mockingbird, 10 seconds. What if this was first contact? What if she was about to destroy humanity's first evidence of extraterrestrial intelligence? What if the object moved fast directly toward her? The Blackbird's defensive system screamed warnings. 5 seconds. Her finger found the trigger. 3 seconds. The object stopped mere meters from her cockpit, close enough that she could see her reflection in its crystalline surface. And in that reflection she saw something else, other shapes, rising from Earth's atmosphere surrounding her. Not one object. Dozens, 2 seconds. She fired the EMP. The pulse rippled out in a sphere of invisible force, and the objects, all of them, flickered and went dark. But in the instant before they died, she heard something through the neural interface. Thank you. Then she was falling, the Blackbird dropping from the edge of space like a spear thrown by God, her oxygen running low, her mission complete but raising more questions than it answered. The descent was controlled chaos. Without power, the objects tumbled around her like massive geometric hail, their crystalline surfaces catching sunlight in ways that created a light show visible from the ground. Later, people would call it the most beautiful meteor shower never officially recorded. The Blackbird's scramjets were useless at this altitude, the air too thin to generate combustion. She had to ride it down on momentum and prayer until reaching thicker atmosphere where the turbofans could restart. 100,000 feet and falling. The G-forces were negative now, trying to pull her out of her seat. The helmet kept feeding her data, showing optimal restart altitude, plotting trajectory curves that all ended in the Pacific if she couldn't get the engines back online by 40,000 feet. 90,000 feet. The first wisps of meaningful atmosphere began buffeting the Blackbird, causing it to buck like something alive and angry. She held the stick steady, using the neural interface to make micro-adjustments faster than her hands could move. Around her, the dead objects were heating up, their surfaces beginning to glow. Whatever they were made of, it wasn't designed for uncontrolled re-entry. They were burning, breaking apart, becoming exactly what the cover story would claim: a debris field from a classified satellite collision. 80,000 feet. Time to try the turbofans. She hit the restart sequence, feeling the engines try to catch, fail, try again. On the third attempt, they roared to life, giving her just enough thrust to control her descent vector. Control Mockingbird, engines restored, beginning controlled descent to recovery altitude. Mockingbird control, good to hear your voice. Be advised, Pacific recovery assets are tracking multiple splashdown targets. Your vector is clear for Edwards Landing. Edwards Air Force Base. Where the impossible became routine and nobody asked questions about aircraft that didn't exist returning from missions that never happened. She guided the Blackbird through a wide spiral, bleeding off altitude and speed, watching the remains of the object streak past like falling stars. In her helmet's display, she could see fighter jets scrambling from 3 different bases, converging on the splashdown coordinates. Whatever those things had been, dozens of very serious people were about to spend months figuring it out. Passing through 50,000 feet, she finally had time to process what had happened. The objects hadn't been hostile, she was sure of that. They'd been observing, maybe recording, possibly transmitting. But when she'd approached, when she'd had the power to destroy them, they'd thanked her. Why? The neural interface was still processing data from the encounter, showing her patterns in the electromagnetic noise the objects had generated. It looked almost like language or music or something in between. The helmet's AI was trying to decode it, running algorithms that made her skull ache with their complexity. At 30,000 feet, she switched back to conventional flight mode, the Blackbird transforming from spaceship to aircraft with subtle adjustments to its control surfaces. The California desert was spreading below her, Edwards visible in the distance, its massive runways waiting to receive aircraft that pushed the boundaries of what humanity thought possible. Mockingbird, Edwards Tower. You are cleared for straighten approach, runway 22. Emergency services are standing by as precaution. Edwards Tower, Mockingbird, copy straighten 22. Her voice was steady, professional, betraying nothing of what she'd just experienced. That would come later in debriefs that would last days, in rooms where recording devices were forbidden, and the truth was whatever kept the world stable. The landing was textbook perfect, the Blackbird's wheels kissing the concrete with barely a chirp. As she rolled out, she could see the convoy of vehicles racing alongside. Security, medical, intelligence, all converging on this aircraft that had just touched the edge of space and returned with more questions than answers. She brought the Blackbird to a stop in front of a hangar that was already opening to swallow it whole. The engine spun down with that tuning fork harmony, now sounding like a lament for something lost, or something found. As she shut down the systems, each one acknowledging her commands with gentle pulses through the neural interface, she realized she could still feel the echo of that last transmission. Thank you. But thank you for what? For destroying them, or for proving something about humanity that they'd needed to know. The cockpit opened, and hands reached in to help her out. Her legs were shaking, not from fear but from the sudden return to normal gravity after experiencing forces that few humans ever survived. Colonel Reeves, it was the person with no insignia, somehow having traveled from Nevada to California faster than should have been possible. Outstanding work. You've just prevented an international incident and possibly something much worse. She removed the helmet, feeling oddly disconnected without the neural interface feeding her information. What were they? We don't know yet. But initial analysis of the wreckage suggests technology decades, maybe centuries ahead of ours. The fact that you were able to disable them with our EMP package suggests they wanted to be disabled. Or they wanted us to think we could disable them, she replied, accepting a bottle of water from a medic and drinking deeply. The person with no insignia studied her carefully. You think there are more? She looked up at the sky, now showing the first hints of dawn, stars fatting as the sun reclaimed its dominion. I think that was a test, and I think we passed. But I don't know what the next test will be. The hangar doors closed behind the Blackbird, sealing away the evidence of humanity's first confirmed contact with something other. In a few hours, the official story would be distributed. Space debris from a classified satellite, successfully intercepted, no threat to public safety. But Vera knew, as did the small circle of people now surrounding her, that the world had changed in those 18 minutes at the edge of space. The question was whether humanity was ready for what came next. Colonel, the engineer appeared, holding a tablet showing data streams from the Blackbird's mission recorder. The neural interface captured something during your encounter. The transmission pattern, it's mathematical, prime numbers but arranged in three-dimensional matrices that form. We're not sure yet, but it looks like instructions. Instructions for what? For building something. The computers are still processing, but preliminary analysis suggests it's a design for some kind of communication device. First contact hadn't been an invasion or a greeting. It had been a gift, or another test. Vera looked back at the Blackbird, sitting in the hangar like a sleeping predator, its black skin still warm from its journey to the edge of everything. In 387 days of exile, she'd sharpened a lot of pencils, processed a lot of forms, wondered if she'd ever matter again. Now she'd just become the first human to engage with extraterrestrial intelligence, and the weight of it was settling on her shoulders like a mantle made of stars. I need to see all the data, she said, her voice carrying the authority that comes from having done the impossible. Everything the sensors recorded, every bit of transmission, every frame of video, and I need the best cryptographers and linguists you have. Already assembled and waiting, the person with no insignia replied. We anticipated you'd want to be involved in the analysis. Of course they had. Because whatever those objects were, wherever they came from, they'd responded to her specifically. Not to the Blackbird, not to Earth's defensive systems, but to her, the disgraced pilot who'd been sharpening pencils until the world needed someone willing to fly beyond the edge of everything. As medical staff led her toward debrief, she caught a glimpse of herself in a window's reflection. The flight suit with its phoenix patch, her face drawn but alive with purpose, her eyes carrying secrets that would reshape humanity's understanding of its place in the cosmos. Mockingbird had become Phoenix, risen from the ashes of her career to touch the stars. But phoenixes, she remembered from mythology, were cyclical creatures. They rose, they flew, they burned, and they rose again. This wasn't an ending. This was the beginning of a cycle that would take humanity places it had only dreamed of reaching. The debrief room was exactly what she'd expected. Windowless, soundproof, with recording equipment that could capture a whisper from across the room. What she hadn't expected was who was waiting inside: the Secretary of Defense, the Director of NASA, and someone she recognized from photographs but had never met, the President's National Security Advisor. Colonel Reeves, the Secretary stood, extending his hand. What you've done today, there aren't words. There don't need to be words, sir. There needs to be action. If those objects were a test, we need to be ready for whatever comes next. The NASA director pulled up a holographic display showing orbital trajectories. We've been tracking anomalies for 6 months, small objects appearing and disappearing at the edge of our sensor range. We thought they were glitches, ghost returns from space debris, but after today, we know we're being watched, Vera finished. And they wanted us to know. The question is, why now? The National Security Advisor leaned forward. We have a theory. In the last 5 years, humanity has made 3 significant advances. We've detected gravitational waves, we've successfully tested quantum entanglement communication over significant distances, and we've begun serious development of fusion propulsion systems. We're approaching a technological threshold, the NASA director added, one that might qualify us for membership in something larger. It sounded like science fiction, but Vera had just disabled multiple extraterrestrial craft at the edge of space. Science fiction was now their operating reality. The transmission data, she said. Has anyone started building what they sent us? A team at JPL is working on it. Initial simulations suggest it's some kind of quantum communicator, but operating on principles we don't fully understand. It could take months just to build a prototype. Or, the secretary said quietly, we could accelerate the program, throw every resource we have at it, but that would mean going public at least partially. The budget allocations alone would raise questions. They all looked at her and she understood. She wasn't just the pilot who'd made first contact. She was going to be the face of humanity's response, the one who'd have to stand in front of the world and explain that we weren't alone, that we'd been tested, and that we'd passed, barely. How long can we keep this classified? She asked. The debris recovery is already attracting attention, the National Security Advisor admitted. Russian and Chinese intelligence are asking questions. Our allies want explanations. We have maybe 72 hours before someone leaks something. 72 hours to decide whether humanity was ready for the truth. Whether 7 billion people could handle knowing that something was out there, watching, testing, waiting to see if we deserved to join whatever cosmic community existed beyond Earth's thin envelope of air.